SCP-9100 Daydream Part 1. There's a phenomenon known as highway hypnosis, in which a person driving an automobile for a stretch of time dissociates their consciousness from driving, leaving it to their subconscious. The result, when they return from the temporary state, is that it feels like they just skipped through time, having no memory of actively driving, despite generally making all the correct motions. While incredibly dangerous, it's a fascinating example of how our own minds can sort of step away from us while still going through the motions. That's what SCP-9100 is about, a phenomenon in which certain people's minds get caught up in a very extended daydream as they continue to simply go through the motions until it all snaps back together. Let's take a look. The article opens with a message to an auditor, informing them that the committee requests that they determine how actions at the Minor Anomalies Unit at Site-86 led to the expenditure of $890 million in Foundation emergency funds and $1.9 billion in estimated losses. The relevant documents and events have been collected for their review. SCP-9100 has the Pending Object class, and the containment procedures state that it is the subject of an ongoing investigation. It is an anomaly speculated to account for rapid mental health decline in a subset of the Akron, Ohio population immediately following the 2014 Akron mid-air disaster. Affected individuals, primarily senior citizens, become convinced that they have skipped several decades of their life, with no memory of the intervening years. The duration of missing time varies between subjects, with it averaging 35 years. The whereabouts of every subject during the relevant time periods are accounted for. With prompting, they are eventually able to recall the missing memories, albeit with a lower fidelity commonly described as a dream. Most subjects express dissociation from their own appearance, with deprecating comments about the state of their hands, skin, or teeth. Subjects affected by 9100 exhibit a drastically increased likelihood of compounding comorbid mental health disorders. On March 1, 2014, a Boeing 737 collided mid-air with a McDonnell Douglas MD-80 ascending from Akron Fulton Airport. The 737 crashed in East Akron, and the MD-80 in Goodyear Heights, killing all 112 aboard the two aircraft and 29 people on the ground. Scattered wreckage from the two planes set fire to several buildings and caused significant property damage. During cleanup operations, Foundation personnel embedded with first responders became aware of a developing rumor that older members of the population had been unusually affected by the disaster. The extreme similarity of the reported symptoms suggested anomalous phenomena. 28 persons of interest have been identified with complaints matching the description of SCP-9100, all of which were personally affected by the crash, either by witnessing it, suffering property loss, losing family members, or being directly injured by falling debris and resultant fires. A real insult to injury situation there, I think. SCP-9100 related complaints started immediately after these stressors occurred, with friends and family commonly reporting this change as a sudden and unexplained shift in personality. As SCP-9100 is presumed to pose a low risk to the public, it was assigned to the Minor Anomalies Unit at Site-86 in Medina County. Obviously, it didn't end up being that minor of an anomaly after all. Site-86 initiated an investigation to identify SCP-9100's cause and mechanisms of action, and if possible, develop a means to treat affected individuals or protect the public from future occurrences. 2 days later, Head of Research Dr. Stuart Finley was assigned by Site Director Harry Talbot. This was Finley's first case at the site following his transfer from the UK. To assist in the investigation, Finley requisitioned a 7-person team of statistics and parapsychology experts. Instead, he was assigned junior researcher Dr. Marissa Vo. We're given an interview between the two doctors and Rhonda Barnes, a 76-year-old victim. She states that she dropped her fork under the table and she bent over to pick it up. That's when it happened. They had finished dinner at a friend's house and they were talking about football. She dropped her fork, bent over to pick it up, and when she looked up, there was a man in a nurse uniform in front of her. He was explaining to her that her husband had died. She thought that wasn't possible, as he's sitting right there, but then she looked around and realized she wasn't at dinner anymore. She was here. She asked where she was, and they said it was a nursing home. They tried to tell her that she'd been here a while. Dr. Vo asks if, for her, the change was instantaneous. She says it was, like walking through a door. Vo asks if she remembers anything between grabbing the fork and waking up here. Barnes hesitates and says that there is something, a dream. Some long, complicated dream, and there were faces. She supposes she does remember people. She remembers that nurse from her dream. She asks if they'll fix it, as they can't leave her here. They only just moved in. Andy's going to paint the nursery, and she can't be old already. It isn't fair. She has to go back. We're next given a voice memo taken by Finley, in which he gripes that he only was granted one junior researcher, practically an intern. Apparently, Site Director Talbot has a grudge against him from years ago for exposing something that caused the higher-ups to put him in the Minor Anomalies unit. Now, Finley is in the same position, and Talbot was beaming at the door when he arrived. He does remark that Vo is quality, though, admiring her confidence, with the first thing she asked him being why they call him Wee Rasputin, on account of his shaggy beard and short stature. Her instincts are sound, though, as they did 14 interviews this week and she led half of them. She knows when to push and when to stay quiet, and she listens to him. She doesn't care for his language, but she doesn't complain about it either. She asks his advice and says that she wants to be like him one day. She wants to get into parapsych, and they stuck her in the dump with him. This case will do her good, though, as it's a fine chance to earn her stripes, do some proper science, and help people who need it. Talbot didn't have a clue when he sent her to him, but the joke's on him. A week later, there was a biographical review of persons of interest, noting each subject's onset date, the last day they could clearly remember before experiencing an apparent time skip and waking up in 2014. Following their onset date, all of the subjects led average, unremarkable lives with no distinguishing successes. Despite decades of employment, all subjects uniformly failed to achieve positions of significant responsibility or authority, nor did they achieve distinction in any particular field. To be fair, that's not especially anomalous. Their performance reviews, where available, frequently contained descriptors signifying compliance, punctuality, and/or inconspicuousness. They scored 3 points off the 50th percentile on standardized tests taken after their onset dates where available, including the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, aptitude testing, military performance, SAT, ACT, and GED scores, and the Presidential Fitness Test. The events surrounding the 2014 mid-air disaster constituted the first significantly traumatic event any of the subjects had experienced since their onset date. Finley writes that what stands out is how little these people stood out. Average in every way, which is about what you'd expect of someone stuck in a daydream. But their friends and family didn't notice anything strange, so whatever this thing is, it's subtle. Vo completed an archival review, identifying several historical cases matching the description of SCP-9100. On May 15, 1916, William Zachary survived the collapse of the Crystal Restaurant in downtown Akron, but was later hospitalized with psychiatric concerns. The doctor's notes remarked that he exhibits a confusional state, believing it to be the year 1874, despite no prior history of mental disturbance. On April 11, 1965, after an F4 tornado struck Pittsfield, Ohio, 4 people were admitted to psychiatric care with symptoms matching SCP-9100. One of these, Adrienne Sunderland, was the granddaughter of William Zachary. On February 18, 1991, a story in the Akron Beacon Journal reported that suicide rates among Akron's senior population were roughly 10 times the national average. A few days later, Finley and Vo hypothesized that the persons of interest had been under the influence of an as-yet unknown anomaly for most of their lives, and that psychological stress in the form of a large-scale disaster had somehow released them. The revised research objective was to identify and study a member of the public who was still under this influence, if such a person existed. In another voice memo, Finley remarks that Vo broke yesterday during an interview with another subject. She tried to hide it, but she'd stopped taking notes and her hands were shaking. As soon as the interview was over, she went to the ladies' room and came out half an hour later, barely keeping it together. She was pissed about it, angry at herself, but she'll be fine. It's his mistake. Too many interviews at once for a case like this. When you're starting out, they get to you, until one day they don't. It turns out that she's a rescue too, a term for a Foundation staff member who was recruited after a personal encounter with an anomaly. Finley sent her to counseling, and she tried to act tough and turn it down. She said that she wants to be like him, the old robot, but he asked her how she thinks he survived 30 years. You take the counseling, get your shit straight, and then come back and do the work right, never letting it get personal. They'll never solve a thing if they let their feelings run away from them. She seemed to get it, as she's smart, even though she's a child. She closed out the interview properly, thanking the woman and waiting till she was out of sight before she lost her shit. He finishes by remarking that she's phenomenal. A week later, Finley gets a message from Talbot telling him that he spent half a year's budget in a month and he hasn't closed it yet. Site 86 is the Minor Anomalies Unit, and funded accordingly. There will be no long surveillances, no experiments, no labs, and no more off-site lunches. He's freezing the spend on SCP-9100, and tells Finley to send the final docs tonight, 1,000 words maximum. 2 days later, Talbot changed the research status of SCP-9100 to Closed Unexplained, and Vo was allocated as a permanent member of Finley's team. 5 months go by, until Finley and Vo attend an off-site seminar on low-grade spectral anomalies, led by Dr. Eckhart. Finley covered Vo's expenses with his own professional development allowance, as Vo had already exhausted hers. The seminar described a novel method of paraspectrography, capable of detecting extremely weak spectral entities. 3 more months later, we're given another voice memo from Finley. He reports that Vo finally took some holidays, and he thought she'd find a beach somewhere, but he found her in the archives looking for something on SCP-9100. She can't let it go. It's not enough that she's dragging him to every class she can find. He didn't think he needed a refresher on atypical demonic resonance manifestations, but here they are. He told her she should focus on some easy cases, show off a bit, and get in with Talbot or whoever till she can make principal researcher and get out of here. But she's just like he was, and she doesn't stand a chance. He's given her some time to look into it though, and he'll handle her casework. If it were him, he'd go over the files again with all they know. Old data, new eyes. Vo interrupts him about some requisition forms for surveillance, but he says that those come out of site funds, and tells her to use the ones for imminent containment breaches. They come out of the global budget, and they never check that kind of thing. Talbot doesn't care, and everything goes on red nowadays. It's noted for the auditor that utilizing breach requisitions in this way is not standard procedure. I would hope that the auditor already knows that. Reviewing what they know that SCP-9100 has existed since at least 1874, and no cases have been identified outside of Ohio. At least 2 contaminated subjects were related, but most were not. Every person of interest identified a specific onset date. None were born with the condition, and onset dates were not correlated with any specific age. Every subject recalled their moment of onset clearly, with the only consistent detail between the described scenes being the presence of at least one other person. Their hypothesis is that SCP-9100 is transmitted virally between humans by unknown means, with each moment of onset marking the instant it was transmitted. Their revised objective is to locate all still living persons named in testimonies, and to confirm via surveillance if they exhibit unusual behavior suggestive of SCP-9100. Of the 50 individuals named in testimonies, 12 of them are still living and were surveilled, with one of them, Owen Parsons, observed to exhibit abnormally consistent behavior. He walked from his private residence in Highland Square to a local bakery, leaving at 9:14 a.m. and arriving at exactly 9:59 a.m. every morning for at least 5 days. Acting on Vaux's research, Finley signed an emergency breach requisition to temporarily detain Parsons and conduct a detailed examination. In another note to the auditor, the evidence indicates that Finley, in order to conceal this requisition, temporarily misappropriated Talbot's authorization seal, which should have been stored securely in the director's office. To mitigate the risk of decontaminating Parsons and breaking the influence of 9100, Finley determined that he must be contained in a minimally stressful manner. He stipulated in the requisition that he and Vaux would collect Parsons rather than field agents, overriding standard protocol. His documented rationale was, so they don't balls it up. Compliance pharmaceuticals have a deleterious effect on cognition and performance, and were thus unsuitable. Finley and Vaux reviewed surveillance data to identify potential leverage. 2 days later, they arrived at Parsons' residence posing as employees of National Geographic, to which Parsons had a subscription. They informed him that he had won a subscriber contest granting an opportunity to travel with NASA astronauts to the International Space Station, provided he successfully clear a battery of physical and mental tests. A selection of fabricated proofs were provided. Parsons was elated and spoke unprompted and at length about his interest in space travel before willingly accompanying the researchers back to Site 86. It's really that easy to just kidnap an old person from their home, I guess. He was given a comprehensive physical, psychological, parascientific, and occult examination. The physical evaluation showed nothing unusual, while the psychological and behavioral evaluation showed improbable consistency in test responses, repeatedly achieving the same score where baseline subjects would fluctuate or show practice/fatigue effects. His gait analysis, balance testing, and fine motor skill testing also showed improbable consistency. His Mensamic Index, an indirect measure of consciousness, was very low, half that of an average healthy adult, indicative of underdeveloped consciousness or deep sleep. He also scored very low in the Individual Initiative Test, a score typically seen only after the administration of compliance pharmaceuticals. Finley writes that all of that stuff with National Geographic was overkill, as he would jump off a cliff if they asked nicely. His metrics are unnatural, but they can't figure out what's causing it. Vaux has some ideas, though. Using the Eckhart-Mendel method of paraspectrographic imaging to detect low-grade spectral possession, they reveal the presence of extremely faint spectral activity overlaid on Parsons' natural brain activity. These patterns were consistent with human consciousness, which is typical in case of possession by human specters. It was thus determined that SCP-9100 is a low-grade spectral entity, although no explanation has yet been determined for the atypical behavior pattern of these specters. Finley writes that this is what's making folks supernaturally average. They're being haunted by the most boring ghosts in history. They don't have the budget to do any more, as Talbot would flip out if he knew Parsons was even in the lab. They'll let him go and keep an eye on it. Parsons was amnesticized and returned to his residence under periodic surveillance. A month later, Vaux sent a message to Talbot, requesting an opportunity to meet with him and review the case files for SCP-9100. She understands that budget constraints prevent them from investigating every anomaly they find, but she truly believes that he may reconsider the relative priority if he'll allow her to talk him through the latest experiment data. SCP-9100 presents a novel form of spectral activity that would be of great interest to the scientific community. More importantly, they believe that there may be many more contaminated civilians in the public. If so, the Foundation could act to significantly reduce the human suffering caused by SCP-9100 by enacting a public decontamination protocol. A week later, Talbot began a series of one-on-one mentorship sessions with Vo, with the stated goal of providing Vo supplementary knowledge related to parapsychology and behavioral anomalies to accelerate her ambitions of securing a position in that department. 6 days after that, Talbot updated the status of the SCP-9100 investigation to Unexplained Open. Additional funding and personnel were allocated to Finley's team for the investigation of the anomaly, including principal researcher Dr. Daniel Bakaluba. A motion filed by Talbot and co-signed by Finley was approved, allowing for the investigation of SCP-9100 to remain at Site-86 for further study. In a voice memo, Finley says that Talbot has changed his tune, and he must have some angle. Just as well, at least this way they can be sure that the work is done right. They finally got a real team though, and they're off to the races after God knows how long. They have half a chance of finding a cure and actually helping people. Bakaluba's good, and Finley worked a few cases with him last year. It was Vo's work that got them here though, and he'll see that she gets her due. Until they know how this thing spreads, he'll call it Keter. Next up is field testing so they can get eyes on it. Then they'll test transmission. They'll be needing some D-class for that, which Finley calls a pain in the arse to work with, never doing what they're told. A day later, Talbot became aware that Finley had been improperly utilizing breach requisitions to conduct unauthorized research on SCP-9100. He was issued an administrative reprimand for his failure to follow proper procedure, in addition to 3 minor charges related to his failure to disclose research activities. Talbot did not report that his authorization seal had been compromised, and so Finley wasn't disciplined for that offense. For her work on SCP-9100, Vo received a commendation and promotion to senior researcher. A day later, she opted to discontinue the one-on-one mentorship sessions with Site Director Talbot. A month goes by, as Finley's team leads a study of the Akron population utilizing EMPSG imaging devices installed in ATMs, supermarket self-service checkout machines, and the drive-thru menus of various fast food establishments in the Akron metropolitan area. 830 cases of SCP-9100 were positively identified. An additional 712 likely cases were detected, but could not be positively confirmed due to image clarity issues, bringing the total suspected prevalence to 1,542. 14 individuals contaminated with SCP-9100 were contained in the Keter-class holding facilities at Site-86. The remaining extant instances in the general population were assigned periodic remote surveillance. The contained instances were situated in a testing chamber with a member of D-Class personnel. Participants were instructed to perform various tasks, such as modifying posture or gaze, remaining silent, or speaking freely. EMPSG imaging was used to determine whether transmission had occurred. Across 117 tests, transmission was observed 9 times, after which both the original host and target individual were contaminated with SCP-9100. In all observed transmissions, the originating host had been contaminated for at least 5 years. This suggests SCP-9100 has a gestation period before it becomes transmissible. The recipient host was not paying attention during the transmission, with brain imaging indicating activation of the default mode network, which is associated with mind-wandering or daydreaming. Then, participants made eye contact. There are no identifiable visual or auditory clues to indicate that transmission has occurred, so only EMPSG imaging can detect SCP-9100. Finley writes that it's been 3 months, and they have barely any useful data. The D-Class were a mess, the facilities are crap, they still have no budget for testing, Bakaluba's new folks are fumbling, but still, they know enough to write something down. Finley formalized a procedure, designated 9100 Dover, to create new instances of infected subjects where necessary. This procedure enabled a ready supply of subjects for testing. Site Director Talbot subsequently redesignated this procedure SCP-9100 TAPS, as apparently the original name was a reference to their mutual grudge. 5 days later, Talbot established Project Daydream, a Level 4 classified initiative. The announcement memoranda for Project Daydream was leaked to Site-86 staff by an unknown source, and the classification was subsequently reduced to Level 2. In a note to the auditor, the collected evidence indicates that the source of the leak was Dr. Finley. 2 days later, Talbot sent a message to all of the Site-86 research staff, telling them that after a thorough review of the available data on SCP-9100, he has established Project Daydream, the development of a revolutionary human resource management tool and a true paradigm shift for Foundation operations. In short, SCP-9100 presents an unprecedented opportunity to address chronic inefficiencies with their D-Class program and other unskilled support staff. Daydream will transform their approach to behavior and performance, and thanks to the reduced fidelity of recovered memories, lessen their reliance on amnestics for information security. Imagine a Foundation without workplace conflicts, violent incidents, or escape attempts, with unwavering adherence to the protocols and procedures that keep them all safe. This sure sounds like something out of the movie Equilibrium. He says that the road ahead won't be easy, as they have much to learn. They must define reliable decontamination procedures, and they must learn how to control the transmission of SCP-9100. Senior leadership shares their excitement for this project, and new funding has been made available. They will spare no expense. Above all, Site-86 will be remembered as the site that ushered in a new era, a new Foundation, freed at last from the foibles of human error. In a voice memo, Finley says that Talbot is off his head. He wants to play with SCP-9100, but they still don't know how the hell it works. The ghost theory is Swiss cheese. Why are the ghosts so weak? How are they still strong enough to possess anyone? And how the hell are they reproducing? They'll never solve this thing at this rate. Vo was pretty pissed when she saw the memo, and said that she couldn't see how Daydream would help. She's going along with it for now, though, as apparently Talbot assured her that he'd pay to decontaminate the public after Daydream goes live. She can't see through his bullshit yet, and still thinks that he's the boss for a reason. He just wants a shiny project to slap his name on, get a pat on the back, and maybe win a SCOTA, the Special Commendation for Outstanding Dedication and Achievement, the Foundation's highest merit award. Then he can claw his way back to the good books, and out of this hole he stuck himself in. Well, Finley's in this hole too, and Talbot's not about to mess up the work just to get his name in lights. 2 days later, Finley's objections to Daydream were recorded at an O4 council hearing. He highlighted the elevated risk profile of utilizing a Keter-class SCP for a novel research project, noting that a reliable method of containment had not yet been found. He was subsequently reprimanded for the unprofessional tenor and personal nature of his remarks. Nevertheless, the O4 Council voted to pause Daydream, citing 9100's Keter object class. 2 weeks later, however, the Northeastern Classification Board voted 6-3 in favor of reclassifying 9100 from Keter to Euclid, as the transmission vector was fully understood. Finley's inquiries after the fact revealed that some information from the 9100 file, notably the experiments on transmission criteria, had been omitted from the hearing due to a clerical error. In a voice memo, he gripes about the clerical error, and asks if this is a professional organization or a clown car. It's always the same with Talbot, and he's not subtle. He was all smiles at the hearing. The fact that he still has a job, let alone site director, is the real clerical error. Daydream was reinitiated the following day, and Finley immediately submitted Form ECB-01 to request an expedited reclassification hearing under his authority as head of research. A week later, at a departmental update, Talbot announced that contained 9100 infected individuals would be relocated from the Keter containment facilities to the lower security Euclid facilities. Finley's strong objections on this matter were again recorded. While the transfer was underway, Finley made a series of unprofessional comments and took actions unbecoming of senior leadership in an apparent attempt to prevent the transfer from occurring. He was detained by a security officer while the transfer was completed. He was reprimanded, and due to the severity of the offense combined with his prior reprimands, he was demoted to principal researcher. Daniel Bakaluba was promoted to head of research for SCP-9100. The following day, the expedited reclassification hearing Finley had requested was cancelled, as he no longer held the authority as head of research to request it. In another voice memo, he says that Talbot's obsessed with Daydream, regardless of what the data says. It's tunnel vision, which is what happens when you get attached and make it personal. He can carry his grudge for as long as he likes, but it's about the work for Finley. Vo heard about his wrist slap, and she stormed in like she was going to fight Talbot then and there. He's never seen her like that. He told her that she's not going to fight this. Talbot's had it out for him since Dover, so she shouldn't get pulled into it. She doesn't owe him a thing. Then she goes all quiet and says that she has to confess that it was her that told Talbot about the breach requisitions and about Parsons. She says that she didn't know he'd use it against him, and she was sorry. He told her so what, as she played the game, got Talbot to care, and got a promotion. He's happy with that, so it doesn't matter what happens to him. She then says that she won't let him down again, so she still didn't get it. He told her to mind her career. They're colleagues, but if she wants to go help people, she needs influence and power. It's not her fault that they stuck her in the bin with the fossils, but she can't get stuck here. It's a waste. Then, after a bit, she asks what if they use the cash from Daydream to research and solve this thing, to do some real work by accident. Now she's talking, he said. 2 days later, Daydream research commenced in the Site-86 Euclid containment facility, under reduced security protocols. The primary research objective was to identify an effective and reliable method of decontamination, under the designation Procedure 9100 NAPIG. One experiment involved educating the subjects on mindfulness meditation techniques, and instructing them to meditate for periods lasting up to 12 hours, with the goal of raising their awareness. All of the subjects reported restlessness and impatience, with no effect on SCP-9100. Finley writes that it was worth a shot, but ghosts aren't so easy to shake. Another experiment involved using occult exorcism rituals to expel the occupying spectral entity. The Pennsylvania Agricultural Center contributed a suitable goat. The experiment resulted in 4 subjects vomiting and 1 losing consciousness, but this was likely due to the nature of the ritual. Spectral distortions unrelated to SCP-9100 manifested in the test chamber and required intervention from the operations cleanup team. There was no effect on SCP-9100. Security footage shows Vo slamming open the fire exit and walking into the center of the courtyard. The sleeves of her lab coat are rolled, and her hands are coated in blood up to her elbows. She stands there for a moment, breathing heavily, until Finley emerges from the fire exit and follows, his hands and forearms also similarly coated with blood. Vo doesn't acknowledge him, but retrieves a notebook from her pocket and begins to write. Her hands are visibly shaking, and the notebook becomes smeared with blood. Finley retrieves a tin from his coat pocket and removes a lighter and what appears to be a hand-rolled cigarette. He lights it and silently offers it to Vo. The pen slips from her hand and lands on the ground. She stares at it as she says that she doesn't smoke, and neither does he. Finley just says that this isn't a cigarette, and neither moves or speaks for several minutes. Eventually, Finley says that a long time ago, she asked him why they call him Wee Rasputin. He wasn't entirely honest. He survived things he probably shouldn't have. Doesn't matter what now. But he kept going anyway and did his job. You tell yourself that you're not here, that this isn't happening, and then you do whatever you've got to. Vo doesn't react. After a few minutes, he hesitates before patting her once on the back, before turning and leaving. A red handprint is visible on her lab coat. 3 weeks later, having failed to identify alternative decontamination approaches, the team's focus shifted to identifying effective, reliable, and repeatable methods of inducing psychological stress in infected individuals. 5 months go by, at which point Vo drafted a message to the Site-86 research team and Talbot. She writes that she would never deny the human cost of prolonged SCP-9100 contamination. Dr. Finley and her are closely acquainted with the suffering experienced by those who awaken from decades of sleepwalking. Somewhere along the path of research, though, of securing, containing, and protecting, they have made themselves jailers and torturers. She has to question whether the cure, as they are defining it, will be better than the sickness. Might their subjects prefer to pass their lives in a daydream than experience Napeag and its long-term effects? How and when do they allow themselves to ask that question, and are they even interested in the answer? The email was never sent, but Vo retained the draft and surrendered it during discovery for the audit. 2 days after drafting it, she accepted Finley's referral to Foundation Counseling, attending for the second time. 2 more months go by, and were provided another experiment. This one had the objective of communicating directly with an instance of SCP-9100 and ascertain its terminal narrative, its final desire at the moment of its death. Fulfilling this will typically neutralize the Spectre. An occult seance was conducted individually with 5 contaminated individuals. They failed to make any contact, and the revised hypothesis is that the spectral entity responsible for SCP-9100 is too weak to communicate coherently. Finley writes that Vo has a theory for why the Spectre is too weak to talk. She thinks that these are the ghosts of sick children who died dreaming of a normal life, and this is their idea of what a normal life looks like. He notes that it would explain the low-intensity signal from an undeveloped consciousness that's more prone to degradation, and it would explain where these extra ghosts are coming from. Synergistic terminal narratives, something she picked up from Eckhart. When ghosts find a haunting pattern they like, it attracts others with the same narrative. He'll buy it, if the data supports it, but he warned her against getting too attached. You can't develop pet theories, or you end up like Talbot. A few days later, they performed another experiment, under the hypothesis that while SCP-9100 entities are too weak to communicate, they will still exhibit a measurable response to key phrases. A set of 250 potential trigger words were spoken aloud to determine if spectral activity spiked on any of the words. Statistically significant spikes in spectral activity were associated with the following key words: home, bones, mother, happiness, lost, love, sick, and mine. In a voice memo, Finley says that Vo's theory might be right after all, about the specters being children. Vo chimes in the background that the biometrics spiked too, so 9100 might just be responding to the subject's natural reaction. After a pause, Finley says that he didn't catch that, and Vo suggests that they should run a control. Finley says that that's smart thinking. She asks if he's alright, and he says that his head's just mince, is all. The following day, they repeated the test with an uncontaminated control subject. The results were identical, indicating that the microspikes in spectral activity were a result of, not the cause of, the concomitant spikes in biometric activity. Finley just notes that's the way things go sometimes. 3 weeks later, another experiment into NAPIG methodologies was conducted, with the objective being to identify decontamination methods. An epinephrine injection was administered to heighten the subject's awareness. One subject experienced medical complications from the injection, leading to cardiac arrest. Security footage shows the subject convulsing on the table, while the emergency medical team works to stabilize them. Vo stands in the corner, writing notes. One of the EMTs asks if someone can move this camera, causing Vo to look up. She tells them not to touch the paraspectrograph, as she needs to observe how the anomaly responds if the subject dies. The subject, however, was successfully resuscitated, and the stress of the experience was sufficient to decontaminate them. In other subjects, the procedure had no effect on SCP-9100. 8 months go by, until Finley's team finalized Procedure 9100 NAPIG, intended to provide a reliable and humane method of decontamination for SCP-9100. We're then informed what Procedure 817 NAPIG entails. NAPIG is a set of decontamination methodologies for SCP-9100, organized into 7 stages of escalating intensity. It is to be enacted only by trained research staff, to ensure fidelity to the procedure and the well-being of the subject. The procedure begins at Stage 1, with a methodology selected randomly from the collection. If decontamination fails at the first stage, practitioners proceed to the next, and so on until decontamination is achieved. The methodologies in each stage are designed to arouse a psychological stress response in the subject, with the goal of heightening their awareness via sympathetic nervous system response to such a degree that the effect of SCP-9100 is nullified. NAPIG currently maintains a 100% success rate, though the precise means by which this response nullifies SCP-9100 is still unknown. Awareness of specific NAPIG methodologies has been demonstrated to increase resistance to them. As such, it is imperative no single individual be made aware of all of the potential methodologies. To date, over 150 methodologies have been approved for NAPIG, contributed by 8 staff members. It is hypothesized that in some cases, prior knowledge of the existence of NAPIG combined with deliberately vague public documentation of its methodologies may be sufficient to cause spontaneous decontamination. Following successful decontamination, all subjects are to receive rigorous psychological aftercare to minimize the likelihood or severity of post-traumatic stress disorder. Stage 1 consists of informational stress, in which the subject is given information that should be highly distressing. Stage 2 entails enhanced informational and sensory distress. The subject is given information combined with sensory stimuli sufficient to cause significant mental stress. During application of NAPIG, researchers are temporarily excused from stipulations in the Ethical Code of Conduct which prohibit lying to a contained subject. Stage 3 involves the application of cognitohazardous information of sufficiently low intensity as to avoid long-term psychological damage. This stipulation greatly reduces the number of viable cognitohazards available. Due to the extreme risk posed to the subject, Stages 4 and 5 require the express approval of the relevant site director. Stage 4 introduces physical stress on the subject through a variety of means, including the application of force. Stage 5 enhances the techniques used in Stage 4 by combining them with methods of psychological manipulation, prolonged deprivation, and sensory assault. Stages 6 and 7 require express approval of the O4 Council. Stage 6 intensifies the methods introduced in Stage 5 via use of anomalous tools, materials, and effects to impart psychological stresses that would not be possible in standard Euclidean geometries and/or linear time. Stage 7 is without description. So basically, the Foundation is taking people stuck in a daydream and is torturing them to force them to wake up, at which point they realize that they're actually old and many of their loved ones are actually dead. Seems like a good use of Foundation resources. With the completion of Napeag, Project Daydream entered the pilot deployment phase, while the remaining research focused on finalizing methods of preventing unwanted transmission. An initiative to decontaminate all contaminated instances in the Akron population, designated Operation Revel, was approved by Talbot and entered the planning phase. Vo received a special commendation for her rigorous work on Daydream and was promoted to principal researcher. In her authority as principal researcher, Vo signed a requisition to surveil the SCP-9100 persons of interest she and Finley had interviewed 3 years earlier. The requisition was initially denied due to lack of funding, so Vo resubmitted it as part of Project Daydream and received approval. Of the 28 persons of interest, 21 were now deceased. Post-mortem examinations confirmed causes of death consistent with natural causes in 15 of them, and suicide by various means in 6. At a routine meeting of the Northeastern Classification Board, Finley's prior arguments in favor of Keter classification were reviewed. Finley and Bakaluba were both given an opportunity to speak, but both declined. The consensus decision was to let the Euclid classification stand. 2 months later, Finley received a behavioral commendation, with special notice given to his steadfast commitment to Daydream. This was the first behavioral commendation of his career. In light of her achievements, Vo received an invitation for transfer to the Parapsychology Division at Site 20. She replied, requesting additional time to consider, which was granted. 3 days later, she submitted a formal complaint regarding Finley's uncharacteristic behavior, detailing 55 research-related errors he had committed in the prior month. In a note to the auditor, it states that due to a clerical error, this concern was misfiled and undiscovered until the A12 audit. Evidence also identified Vo as the author of an unsigned internal memo delivered to all Site-86 staff at this time, advising team members to avoid eye contact with Finley until the formal complaint had been processed. That's not going to be good. We know this ends with a massive expenditure of funds out of the Minor Anomalies unit, but it's not ostensibly any sort of disastrous or apocalyptic scenario. If the boring child ghost bug goes around, it could certainly cause some issues, but it's nothing a bit of intense physical and psychological torture can't solve. We'll find out how badly things end up in Part 2.